Congratulations! You made the Varsity, the podcast. My name is John Ourand, and I am Puck's sports correspondent and the host of this pod. And today, we return with what I like to call Puck's Super Friends for another year in review show. 3 of my Puck colleagues will join me today to argue about who should be considered the sports business personality of 2025. If you remember, in last week's episode, we hashed out the top sports stories of the year, and today, it's all about the people. We're going to be joined by Julia Alexander, who knows more about the streaming business than just about anyone else I know. Eriq Gardner is also here. Eriq is the country's best courts reporter, and I'm really hoping that he does not bring up the 85-point drubbing that I suffered during our fantasy football matchup last weekend. Then there's a great Dylan Byers. Dylan writes Puck's private email on the news business called In the Room, and he hosts, along with Julia, the great podcast, The Real Room. You're really going to like this one. But before we get to our sports media personality of the year, today is Wednesday, December 10th, and here's what I'm watching. And for me, it's all about Notre Dame and its omission from the college football playoff. Personally, I think Notre Dame should have gotten in, but that's not why I'm interested in this story. If you listen to the reaction from the school, there's going to be some fallout from this decision. Fighting Irish athletic director Pete Bavacqua went on the Dan Patrick Show Monday and put the ACC on blast. Bavacqua accused the ACC, the conference, for attacking Notre Dame while supporting Miami's inclusion in the CFP. Notre Dame, of course, is a partial member of the ACC, while Miami is a full-time member. Here's what Bavacqua said. He said that the ACC had done, quote, permanent damage to their relationship. It raised a lot of eyebrows here that the conference was taking shots at us, he said. Now look, I've known Pete for a long time. NBC hired him 8 years ago to run the sports division. And here's the thing about Pete. He doesn't fly off the handle. He chooses his words carefully. Honestly, he's probably the most measured voice that I've ever covered in the business. And by measured, I mean not really quote-worthy. He's a really good guy to hang out with, but whenever we went on the record, he wouldn't want to mix things up. So when someone like Pete Bavacqua uses words like permanent damage and accuses the conference of taking shots at us, it's especially meaningful. Now, ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips, he responded to Bavacqua's comments with a statement that called Notre Dame a valued member. And he said that the ACC never suggested that the CFP should snub Notre Dame. But here's what I know. It's never a good sign when two sides argue with each other in the media. It certainly does suggest that this relationship has been damaged. Permanently, we'll see, but it's clearly in a really bad place right now. I mean, it's easy to see why Bavacqua is peeved. In the week before the CFP selection, the ACC pushed Miami over Notre Dame on several social posts, and according to The Athletic, ACC Network showed Miami's win over Notre Dame, get this, 13 times. Notre Dame has been associated with the ACC for the past 11 seasons. It generally plays 5 or 6 ACC teams per season, and my sense is that we should all continue to watch this space because this is an arrangement that could undergo serious changes. But for right now, let's get to Puck's Super Friends, Julia Alexander, Eriq Gardner, and Dylan Byers. Another roundtable with my Puck colleagues, Julia Alexander, Dylan Byers, Eriq Gardner. We are doing a year in review here. We're going to focus on the person of the year as far as sports business is concerned. And Dylan, I want to start with you, your person of the year.
Yeah, without question, it has to be David Ellison. And I think anyone who follows the business, the industry of media, which Julia and I talk about every week, knows just how quickly and aggressively he has moved into this space with an incredible amount of capital, obviously, and a great deal of ambition. And that has had particular ramifications on the world of sports, because by virtue of acquiring Paramount, he immediately bought a stake in the NFL. He moved very quickly to make a deal with UFC. Now he's potentially on the cusp of acquiring Warner Brothers Discovery, which could bring more sports rights into the portfolio. And, you know, this group has talked on another episode about the value of sports in the ecosystem, and particularly the value of sports in both cable bundle and in streaming. He's somehow has a plan to keep both of those things going at the same time for the foreseeable future. That's part of the strategy. It's not just streaming, and I think that's very meaningful to sports partners. And you look at these deals he's done. You look at how much money he paid for UFC. I think 7.7. It shows a real intention here. Again, real ambition to sort of be a player in this space, and having part of the David Ellison thesis with acquiring Paramount, again potentially WBD, is can you take all of the legacy media assets and can you roll them up and make them competitive with some of the new entrants who have also had a profound effect in the sports space? Obviously, Amazon, Netflix, YouTube. If he can do that, that's a real meaningful player to have at the table for the Roger Goodells and the Adam Silvers of the world. As we move towards several years down the line, of course, towards the next wave of rights negotiations. So I just think, look, part of the story of Hollywood and the contraction of Hollywood is that you've got people coming along who claim they might be a savior, claim they're going to change the game. We're all very familiar with the David Zaslav story. It doesn't always pan out the way that they hoped that would. But you look at a guy like David Ellison, he's here to play, not just for he's not flipping houses the way that Zaslav is. He's here. He's got a long game ahead of him. And I think he's going to be a very meaningful player, not just in the Hollywood space, not just in the media space, but certainly in the sports space, in the sports media space, I think for a long time to come.
Dylan, I always hesitate to say that anybody's overspent for sports rights because in my entire career, the number always seems ridiculous. And then by the end of the contract, it's like, oh, what a bargain they ended up getting. And you remember when the NFL sold $1.1 billion, $110 billion. I wish it was 1.1, $110 billion worth of media rights deals. I was like, no, what can get higher than that? And then the NBA comes along like not a year later, and that looks like it's undervalued. That being said, you referenced a 7-year, $7.7 billion deal for the UFC, more than doubling, really blowing everybody else out of the water. And every other media company is chirping in my ear about it. They're never going to make any money off of that. It's they way overpaid for those rights. Again, I don't know if they did. We'll find out in 7 years if they did or not. Does it matter if they overpaid for those rights, though? Is this certainly it's something that Paramount and under Ellison can afford. It certainly sent a message to everybody else in the business of we're open for business. Does it matter that if they overpaid?
Yeah, well, first of all, complaining or trying to point out that someone overpaid for something usually is the sour grapes of the losing party who either couldn't pay, or just made a different sort of calculation. But I guess you have to think about this. Saying that anyone overpaid for anything, right? Saying that Brian Roberts overpaid for the NBA, saying that, like Eddie Q overpaid for F1, saying that David Ellison overpaid for UFC. You could certainly make the argument that that's true on a sort of like quarterly earnings projection, right? Or looking at like how long this might take to materialize and everything that needs to go right based on present day economics. Totally. But if you pull back and you think about what does the future media landscape look like? Amazon, YouTube, Netflix, all playing a different game, all living in an entirely different stratosphere with different business models in which the media is just a small bit of the business. It is almost just the marketing piece of their business, right? How do you gain entry into that if you are not if you're not a Silicon Valley player? There's a lot of content and there's a lot of legacy affiliation among fans and audiences built in to Hollywood. And so the strategy is, can you come along and can you take that and can you level that up to compete? And so if the price of doing that is a $7.7 billion deal, right? Or is potentially overpaying for Paramount, overpaying for Warner Brothers Discovery, overpaying for everything. Does it make sense? Well, again, you have to look at how much capital you have. And if you're David Ellison and you're the son of Larry Ellison, I'm not suggesting that they are by any means stupid with their money. I don't think Larry Ellison got to where he is by being stupid about money. But you can afford to make certain calculations that are based off of future value that aren't so where you're not so vulnerable to, again, those that sort of like quarterly thinking or annual thinking.
The I do find it interesting though that they have Jeff Shell, David Ellison has Jeff Shell, who used to be at NBC, of course, and was at Fox before that.
Yeah.
Big sports fan, somebody that in my world understands the value of sports rights and it's consistently invested in sports rights. And so the idea that they bid on UFC and then are going to sort of take a powder and see what else happens. I suspect baseball's rights are up in 2028. I always reference Jeff Shell as being a season ticket holder to the Dodgers, and the seats right behind the dugout. In fact, so I can see where that where this is going to be, step one of a multi-step process.
Yeah, it is. It's not. Look, there is one thing. Again, we talked about this in the previous episode. There's one thing that everyone in this business, whether they're on the old side of it or the new side of it, seems to agree on, which is the value of sports. And again, they come at it with different calculations about value and about what it can do for their business and how meaningful it is to one sort of business model versus another business model. But we all sort of agree, as media becomes more fragmented, as people are spending more time, for lack of a better word, around on like TikTok or Instagram, like what are the monoculture moments? What are the things that bring people together? It's sports. It's live. And I think everyone in the game recognizes the value of that. And again, you think about, okay, well, what is fair market value for something like a UFC or for the NBA or MLB or anything like that? I think you also have to take into account what happens if you don't have that. Right? What happens if you lose out on those assets? And then how do you gain entry into the future competitive landscape if you're not holding any of those assets in the portfolio? I think that's the calculation you make. I think it's why these companies tend to spend more money than I think immediately makes sense when you're just looking at the hard numbers.
Dylan, let me take a quick break. We're going to come back. Julia, I'm going to get your person of the year. So we're going to go from Dylan talking about sports rights and paying so much for sports rights to Julia talking about one of the most expensive sports talents that's out there. Your person of the year. I'm dying to hear you defend this one.
Well, first, I'd like to commend us all on not just picking David Ellison, because he was also top of the list for me too. My person of the year, is Pat McAfee. I think it's impossible to talk about the current sports media landscape, the future sports media landscape, where investment in personalities is coming from, the push for companies like Disney and Fox and Netflix and others into kind of the sports adjacent media podcasting space, without talking about Pat McAfee.
So talk to me in terms of who Pat McAfee is. Is he a TV star? Is he a YouTube star? Does it even matter what he is?
That's the exact right question. It doesn't matter. Pat McAfee, who hosts a 3-hour-ish, as he will tell you, live stream on YouTube, with the first 2 hours also available on ESPN, is, in my opinion, the future of what sports media looks like from a personality standpoint. He is a former NFL player who's better known for taking his shirt off and singing school cheers and diving into pools at the University of Miami. He's better known for the gimmicks he brings to college game day with the 30-yard kick for students to win money. He's better known for his drama than he is for anything else. And all of this can be spun as a negative, right? When it was the Aaron Rodgers COVID anti-vax moment a few years ago, it was a negative. It was this idea of people asking, Why should Pat McAfee have a platform on ESPN? Why is he worth the, I think, 85 million, correct me if I'm wrong, John, dollars that the $85 million that ESPN was giving him? Why is he the face of College Game Day? And then you look at the results, right? The ratings on College Game Day are up. His YouTube channel is incredibly successful. He has a built-in audience that follows him from platform to platform. And the thing about Pat McAfee that I think is most important this year is that this was also the year that everyone decided video podcasts were the future of television. I mean, case in point, right? Like this idea that all of these different networks were looking at the authentic relationship that podcasters and live stream hosts had with audiences that who were never going to sign up for cable, but who they were very, very much trying to corral into being paying subscribers to their own platforms. You can't really do that with content alone. Sports has the advantage of live sports, and ESPN obviously needs live sports. But if you're looking at that type of shoulder programming, it's less so the 5, 6 guys around a desk, right? You have a Stephen A. Smith, you have a Greenberg, but for the most part, what people really want is to build a community around their favorite superstar. And so if you watch a Pat McAfee live stream, as I do almost every single day in this office, the comments are active. He's responding to them. There are inside jokes that feel like the perfect bridge between television of yesteryear and the YouTube creator sphere of tomorrow. And I think he is the example that everyone is chasing, including Fox with their deal with Dave Portnoy at Barstool to a far less successful extent. But he really feels like the outstanding example of what sports media will look like. And I think it's very difficult to replicate.
Okay, can I just jump on something Julia was saying there? The other thing about Pat McAfee, and Julia and I talk about this all the time, Pat McAfee now is shorthand for the entire change that's happening across the media industry, which we love to talk about here at Puck, which is about that the talent is the market unit, right? And you build franchises around the talent. And just to see legacy media players like ESPN and Fox understand, and we're going to see this happen in cable news too. We're going to see it happen at CNN and MSNBC. Just understand that these digitally native, YouTube creators on any social media platform, and saying these people have figured out what the audience likes, and they get to dictate the terms of the deal, but we want a piece of it. And so even if that means licensing the content and letting them do whatever they want to do and letting them get away with things that we wouldn't let, that ESPN wouldn't let its own talent get away with, that is the game that they have to play. And that is indicative of a change that is going to happen just across the media industry, more broadly speaking. And so, Julia, that's exactly right. McAfee is the sort of like the first mover in a space that is really redefining how these legacy networks, whether it's news, sports, what have you, approach talent and gain audiences and maintain a stake, despite the fact that their industry is in decline.
All right, two questions.
First Netflix for you, Dylan. Replicating it.
Two questions. Exactly. First for you, Dylan. Is this unique to sports? Like, the news business better than anybody I know. Where can we see a Pat McAfee of the news business? Does that exist right now?
Well, you're already seeing ways in which, if you look at the New York Times, you're seeing ways in which they've gone in and talked sort of at The Athletic, brought in YouTube creators and are sort of they're sort of dipping their toe in the water there. I know that those conversations are happening in the cable news space. I know that if you look at businesses like anything from, like, let's take MSNBC, for example, you talk about a Punch Bowl, which covers Congress day in and day out. You talk about more sort of opinion or analytical companies like Pod Save America or The Bulwark. Are there conversations happening that say, well, look, no one is watching MSNBC at 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon? Could we conceivably do a McAfee style deal where we license the video feed and bring that in? I mean, Now, I don't want to break the fourth wall here, John, but you're on NESN right now, right? Like someone decided that the work you are doing, you are at the top of your game in covering the business of sports, and that is valuable to an NESN. You're going to see that you are going to see that happen across the industry because the audience and the audience engagement is more meaningful, and because the economics, frankly, are just better than that sort of old school model of hiring a bunch of people, trying to build them up, putting a ton of makeup on them, doing a heavily produced roundtable talk where no one says anything of interest because all the people who have something interesting to say have gone out and joined the Pucks or the Substacks of the world.
I feel like I have to give a shout out to Sportsnet Pittsburgh as well as Nesson.
Yes.
The other Julia, McAfee doesn't exist in a vacuum. I mean, you mentioned Dave Portnoy. In sports, like other people that have gigantic contracts, like Stephen A. Smith, he seems different than from McAfee to me, or a Scott Van Pelt, or somebody. Who else is in sports that is similar to what McAfee does?
In sports specifically, I don't think there is anyone who can do what McAfee does. And I'll give you a good example of how that translates into a more old school product for a new school audience. Look at what McAfee does on College Game Day. He is standing up on chairs. He is singing songs. He finds a way to put a smile on people's faces who are normally kind of just standing there. And, they're excited because they're college kids and they're drinking and they're excited for what the game is going to happen. But they feel like McAfee is one of them. It doesn't take much. And I think if you look at the difference between him and Portnoy leans into being the heel. He leans into being the guy that people watch, but they don't necessarily want to hang out with. McAfee's big advantage, which he has learned from some of the most popular creators, is that athletes want to hang out with them, coaches want to hang out with them, but college kids want to hang out with them. And the ratings on College Game Day on the linear side are through the roof. The ratings on the linear side for McAfee on ESPN are increasing. So there is, to Dylan's point, a linear audience who's tuning in. It's not just the YouTube audience. But I think the more important thing that McAfee is doing is increasing the value of these licensing deals to other platforms. And so if you look at what Bill Simmons is doing with Netflix, which is bringing some of the Ringer shows over, if you look at the reported Gary Linkler, I always get his last name wrong, deal with The Rest is Soccer, where he is reportedly going to have a daily kind of show during the World Cup on Netflix. They're trying to find ways into these creator athlete adjacent spaces that they think will bring an authenticity for fans who don't necessarily just want to watch SportsCenter. And if you look at what Stephen A. Smith is doing, he's going in the opposite direction, where Stephen A. Smith is part of his contract. Yes, he's getting a reported, I believe, $100 million from ESPN over the next several years to be still the face of that network. But he also is focusing on his YouTube channel where he's talking more about politics and he's leaning into the Stephen A. Smith brand. And I think, to Dylan's point, the biggest lesson we have in media, and sports media is just one of the largest parts of media as a whole, is this idea that talent is synonymous with brand, and the brand of talent goes far beyond what it used to be. It's no longer just being known for a show or a network. And so I think that's the lesson for a lot of these other networks trying to compete with McAfee, is that they need to find someone who can both encompass the brand, but can also be a standout star on their own.
I'm going to take one more quick break. We're going to come back. Eriq, we're going to get your person of the year, sports business wise. A great choice, in my opinion. We'll be right back. So one of the stories of the Puck cinematic universe, as John Kelly likes to say regarding our newsletters, is the chaos that is involved with college sports. And that is my lead into you, Eriq, to talk about your person of the year for 2025 sports business is
Judge Claudia Wilkin. So yes, this is for obvious and not so obvious reasons. The obvious reasons are the chaos in college sports, where we see massive realignments. We're seeing compensation wars among athletes and coaches. It's such instability right now in college sports. I mean, I remember a time when the .com ball used to mean something, and these 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 days it's just, like I don't know where we're going to be 3 years from now. It just seems like every year things are transforming in college sports. But I also picked it for a different reason, and this one's not so obvious. I think that artificial intelligence is a hugely important topic in our realm, and I thought long and hard about, well, how has AI impacted sports? And to a lesser degree, it has. I don't think that AI, we're never going to want to really watch, AI robots play against each other. There's probably not going to be sports rights bidding wars over humanoids playing. But what it does do is it opens up a lot of free time for the rest of us. There's going to be a boom in amateur sports. There's going to be a reexamination of the worth of universities. And for all that, I'd say that, her rulings have not only shifted the business of college football and basketball, but I'd argue are having massive downstream impacts to amateur athletics. And so as everything kind of gets reordered, and as there's a newfound reflection of these of the worth of four-year universities, and as amateur sports bubbles up, who has the power? Who can restrain someone from licensing their name, likeness, and image? I would suggest that her rulings are going to become more and more important, in the coming years. And we're just at the beginning of a massive shift in this arena.
So take us through Judge Wilkins' rulings. Like what specifically were some of the rulings that she came up with, and how are we seeing that play out in the college field?
Yeah, I mean, the first rulings had to do with the restrictions on what college athletes could do in as a condition for participating in college athletics. So the NCAA and the leagues would tell these students that if you want to play in our sport, you have to pretty much give up your rights to compensation. You have to sign over your name and image and like this. And it wasn't at first directed. They weren't saying like colleges have to pay these athletes. What they were just saying is that no, this is an antitrust problem, and they couldn't stop the athletes from doing stuff on their own. And there's been all these follow up rulings about how far this goes, like what are rules that can be justified for competitive reasons, and what are rules that can't be uh, followed. And that's just led to one big decision after the next, and now we're kind of like floating into this arena where a lot of the powers that be in the college sports world have been very reticent to regulate because they don't want to get brought into court, and that led to big settlements between athletes and the lawyers representing them and all that. But we're still at kind of the beginning stages of this, and there's still dozens of lawsuits that go on over things like inducement to pay athletes, and trying to get them to switch schools in random moments. What happens if an athlete's promised something, and then the college or the NIL collective changes their mind? I mean, there's just a lot of headaches and problems. Can students unionize? That's another big one. Are they employees? For the ones who are at state universities, what are what can we do about the state laws that don't let, like, state employees unionize and all that? And it goes on and on and on. And so we're at, like, the midstream of all this, but there's still lots of problems to figure out. And some suggest that that's going to take legislation at the federal level. But I don't know what the answer is going to be. All I do know is that 10 years from now, things will look radically different than they do right now.
you just listed about a half a dozen issues that are paramount in college sports right now. Um, you picked Judge Wilkin as your person of the year. Are these issues all going to be solved in the court of law? Are they going to be solved in Congress? Are they going to be solved by the Big Ten and the SEC coming together to kind of create their own rules? How do you see this playing out?
See, that's part of the problem here is that no single person has, control over this. Part of it's going to be, solved in federal courts, but some of it's going to be solved at the National Labor Relations Board, and some of it's going to be solved at state legislatures, and some of it's going to be, bargains between, collectives of universities and collectives of players. And right now, everyone is uh, kind of scrambling in the dark for a way, out of this, and no one's really kind of figured it out yet. I would say that, Claudia Wilkins is at the forefront because her decisions were formative, and she still, oversees a bunch of very important cases. Absolutely, there's, legal strife that's happening in all necks of the woods. And, I would not want to be like a general counsel at one of these universities right now. You're just dealing with problems left, right, and whatnot. They just keep coming up.
Yeah, I am totally flabbergasted by college. Just in terms of, uh, I almost have never seen an entity like college sports beg Congress to get involved and save them from themselves. And you're seeing that consistently across colleges. And I think it's because, like you said, it's the labor relations board, or it's judges, or it's a rogue conference, or maybe a rogue school within the conference that's trying to set a new precedent. And it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to corral all of that.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that I would point out is that, we've spent a lot of money on college basketball and college football, especially the men's programs. And, we still have something on the books called Title IX. And so, we're trying to like reorder everything on the fly, but there's still, statutes out there that men and women's sports have to be, invested at an equal level. You know, and colleges are faced with all these differing priorities at the same time, and it's just a trouble spot. And on top of that, like I said, we're entering this age of AI where, a lot of people are kind of reconsidering the worth of a four-year university when there's not like ample white collar jobs out there. And so, I think sports and the kind of socio-economic elements of college kind of go hand in hand. And, there's going to be a lot of things that shift in the next few years. And, you know, uh, I'm very interested to see where this all heads.
Yeah. What was the name of the bowl that you shouted out? I have very fond memories of my Maryland Terrapins representing the state of Maryland in the Poulan Weed Eater Independence Bowl a couple of years ago. So a big victory
I
for us
said
out
the
there.
pet.com bowl, but I don't know. There were some funny names for college bowls. I remember waking up, on New Year's and getting excited about the 15 games that I had to watch. It didn't matter who was going to be the national champion. Now it seems like it's completely changed. Now it's all about who's making the playoffs and talking about like the Pat McAfee's. Like there's ample content out there for the talking heads to discuss who's in and who's out, but it's just a completely different realm than it was 20 years ago when we I was just excited to watch some two random teams not necessarily playing for much in the Peach Bowl or whatever.
I'm going to move on to my person of the year for 2025 is David Ellison adjacent. It is Mark Shapiro, who is, of course, the president of WME Group and TKO. And, you know, one of my biggest stories that I've been covering for the past probably 2 years, and certainly I'm going to be covering for the next 5 years, is that there are going to be halves. So the NFL, when they come up with their rights, they're going to break the bank. They're a half. The NBA, they're going to break the bank. Or they did break the bank. They're certainly have Big Ten, SEC, and then you have sort of the have-nots. And I think you saw that this year when Formula One was going out and it was trying to find a buyer, and it ended up with a pretty good deal with Apple. But that was certainly after every linear TV network ended up passing on that. And so within this environment, you have Mark Shapiro, who I think could sell ice to Eskimos, and he had the rights to the UFC, and it looked like he was going to have to split up UFC among 2, 3, maybe even 4 different networks, which is something that consumers always detest, sort of having to find their different different sports on different platforms. And he ended up getting Paramount to agree to a 7-year, $7.7 billion deal, which is really a factor of great timing, because David Ellison had just taken over, CBS and Paramount, and he needed to make a splash, and that was a splash. So that was great timing. But then he turns around and he has a WWE package of PLEs, sort of, all of the WrestleManias, the pay-per-view events, and he ends up selling it to ESPN for a 5-year deal worth, I think, $325 million per year, $1.6 billion for that WWE package. And so as I'm writing about the networks that are really tightening their belt and saying no to different rights, here he comes with UFC. Nobody's going to confuse the UFC with the NFL and with the NBA. And somehow he was able to figure out these massive deals. We might look back on 2025 and that Paramount UFC deal as a high watermark, not for all sports rights. Like I said, you have big time sports that are still going to get paid, but for, where would you put UFC? In the, upper middle, certainly not at the top. And he was able to work out what was a really rich and great deal for his company, which nobody should have doubted, because he's also the one that negotiated, to your point, Julia, Stephen A. Smith's big deal as well. So he knows how to negotiate. If I need somebody to negotiate for me, I'm calling Mark Shapiro or Nick Khan. I'm going to get them out there to try to work that out. But I just think what Mark Shapiro has done with TKO and WME Group has been really really worth a shouting out for 2025. So I want to throw that out to you for comment, Dylan or Julia.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, look, here's what I'll say. It is rare. I think if you're a seller, it's rare that you have an opportunity where, one, you've got David Ellison entering the market, willing to pay a premium because he needs the assets. He's trying to make a splash. And at the same time, you've got other players who recognize, it's the through line through this entire conversation, you need to have sports rights. You need to have some piece of it. And so the question is, these things get locked up. NFL gets locked up. NBA gets locked up. Some people get priced out of it. And you say, what can you have? Can you have WWE? Okay, let's go. Let's take it. That is a great market. And Mark's sense of timing there, I mean, some of it's just fortuitous, to be sitting on those rights at this particular moment when people are hungry. That's great, but his ability to recognize that and strike while the iron is hot is great. And in the process, I just have to say he also earned himself what is probably the most glowing profile that's ever been written in the Wall Street Journal of any media executive. I went through that article twice trying to find one critical word about Mark Shapiro. So kudos to him for that. But yeah, it's
in fact,
just
Dylan,
a really
I'm going to
good
go on to the prediction bets afterwards and try to put some money on him to be the next CEO of Disney, because that's
certainly in the conversation. It's certainly in the conversation.
He also benefits from what I keep referring to as the severity of barbelling in culture. And this also leads to kind of rights. To your point, John, there are big must-haves, right? The NFL, the NBA, less so than it was 20 years ago, but certainly still today. And then there's the have-nots. But the have-nots can also be rethought of as niche or just ones with heavy amounts of fans in a small concentrated market. And the thing about the UFC and WWE specifically is that these are the type of events, we talk about the eventification of sports that Netflix is interested in. These are the type of events that draw significant brand sponsors that do feel like monoculture in a period of fragmented, dismediated, kind of delineated audience attention. And these are the type of events that, if you monetize correctly, can be extremely valuable at a smaller cost than having to go into some of the bigger leagues where there's increased tonnage, where it's harder to convince advertisers, certainly not impossible, but harder to convince them that they need to be on every match in hyper-local markets. And so I think if you read the tea leaves of what David Ellison is trying to do as someone who has a lot of other sports where there is the ability for regular season advertising and built-in fandom, if he can lean into having more events and Mark Shapiro suddenly shows up and says, I have something that I think has a growing base and can certainly be eventized in a new era, I think that becomes a really savvy deal for someone who's thinking about what the future of audience participation in sports looks like, who's thinking about betting, who's thinking about how to broach broadcast audiences and streaming audiences, and how to do it all in a way that shows to the rest of the sports and Hollywood players that he's willing to spend money. And so when Mark Shapiro looks at exactly who wants that type of deal, David Ellison is kind of the perfect partnership. And so I think it was a win-win on both sides.
Julia, that is the perfect final word. I could do this every week, guys. Thank you so much for joining the Varsity again, 2 weeks in a row. I'll see you guys all at the Christmas party, Puck Christmas party. I hope. Dylan, are you coming over for that?
I will be in New York that week, and I will try to get in just in time for that.
Hey, sincere thanks for taking the time. I know how busy you three are, so I appreciate it. That was great. We have David Ellison, Pat McAfee, Judge Claudia Wilkin, Mark Shapiro. That's a great foursome. I really want to thank Julia, Eriq, and Dylan for taking the time to join me this week. These types of conversations, honestly, they could go on for hours. They do go on for hours on Puck's internal Slack channel. So I had so much fun with this, and I really hope that you did too. More importantly, though, I want to thank you for listening to The Varsity, an Odyssey podcast in partnership with Puck. I also want to thank the executive editors from Puck, that's Gabi Grossman, Ben Landy, John Kelly, the great team from Odyssey, Bob Tabador and Patrick Antonetti. And don't forget our new partners from Nesson. There's Greg Poth and Mark Malacca. If you like this podcast, make sure to sign up for my newsletter. It's also called The Varsity. Head over to puck.news and use the code word The Varsity, all one word, for a 20% discount. And I will see you on Sunday.